When Claudia Johnson stepped into an exclusive Manhattan boutique, she expected elegance, not humiliation. But the sideways glances and forced smiles told her otherwise. Then came Victoria Harrington, a wealthy socialite who swept in like she owned the world. From the moment Victoria saw the limited edition handbag in Claudia's hands, she made it her mission to take it. The snide remarks, the insults, the public mockery. Claudia endured them all with unshaken poise. What Victoria didn't know was that Claudia wasn't just another customer. She was the majority shareholder of the multi-billion-dollar brand. Victoria believed she held the power. She couldn't have been more wrong. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The Manhattan afternoon sun filtered through the boutique's pristine windows, casting elegant shadows across polished marble floors. Claudia Johnson's heels clicked purposefully as she entered, her charcoal gray suit perfectly tailored, her natural hair styled in a sophisticated updo. The lunch meeting with investors had gone well, and she'd decided to treat herself to a brief shopping excursion before heading back to the office. The moment she stepped inside, the atmosphere shifted subtly. A young sales associate behind the counter straightened, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Two customers browsing scarves glanced up, then quickly away. Claudia had experienced this dance countless times before. The sideways looks, the poorly masked suspicion, the silent judgment. After decades in the corporate world, she'd learned to wear their prejudice like a familiar, if unwelcome, coat. Moving through the store with practiced grace, Claudia made her way to the handbag display. The latest collection had just arrived, and she was particularly interested in seeing the craftsmanship up close. A sales associate, blonde, probably in her mid-20s, materialized beside her almost immediately. "Can I help you?" The girl's voice was pitched high, her smile plastic. She stood close enough that Claudia could smell her perfume. "I'm just browsing for now, thank you." Claudia's tone was warm but firm, the same voice she used in boardrooms to establish boundaries. The associate nodded but didn't move away. Instead, she began straightening already perfectly aligned bags, hovering within arm's reach. Claudia could feel the girl's eyes on her every movement, watching her hands as though they might suddenly snatch something. "The security tags on these are electronic," the associate said unprompted, touching one of the bags. "They're quite sensitive." Claudia raised an eyebrow but kept her expression neutral. "I'm well aware of how security tags work." She moved to another display, and, predictably, the associate followed, straightening items that needed no straightening. The boutique's door chimed, and a gust of voices filled the quiet space. "Well, obviously they should have held it for me. Don't they know who I am?" Victoria Harrington swept in like a hurricane in designer clothes, her voice carrying across the store as though she owned it. Her blonde hair was expertly highlighted, her makeup flawless, her outfit screaming old money. Two other associates rushed to greet her, their attention immediately diverted from Claudia. "Mrs. Harrington, welcome back. The shipment you inquired about arrived this morning. Can we get you some champagne?" Victoria waved away their attention like shooing flies. "Where's Thomas? He usually handles my purchases. I don't work with just anyone, you know." Claudia continued her browsing, moving toward a display featuring the limited edition collection. The bags were works of art, handcrafted leather in rich browns and blacks, with subtle gold hardware that caught the light. Her fingers traced the edge of a particularly beautiful piece, appreciating the subtle grain of the leather. The young associate who had been following her was now caught between watching Claudia and attending to Victoria, who had begun loudly critiquing a display near the entrance. "That arrangement is all wrong. Whoever did that clearly doesn't understand luxury presentation. My husband sits on the board, you know. He'll hear about this." Claudia picked up the limited edition bag, turning it over in her hands. The craftsmanship was exceptional, exactly what she'd expect from their artisans in Milan. She'd visited the workshop herself last spring, watching the meticulous work that went into each piece. Victoria's voice grew closer, her heels clicking against the marble floor. No, everything about this is wrong. The spring collection should be more prominent. Honestly, it's like none of you understand visual merchandising. The sales associates trailed behind Victoria like anxious ducklings, nodding and making notes. Claudia continued her examination of the bag, noting the perfect stitching, the careful attention to detail. This was why she'd invested in the company in the first place, the unwavering commitment to quality. Victoria's path through the store brought her to the limited edition display. Her eyes locked onto the bag in Claudia's hands, and her perfectly made-up face twisted into something ugly. She paused her tirade mid-sentence, attention now fully focused on Claudia and the coveted item she held. The air in the boutique seemed to thicken. The sales associates froze, watching the scene unfold. Victoria's eyes narrowed, her red lips pressing into a thin line as she assessed Claudia from head to toe. Her gaze lingered on Claudia's hands holding the expensive bag, and her nostrils flared slightly. Claudia continued her careful inspection of the bag, aware of Victoria's approaching footsteps, but choosing not to acknowledge them. She'd dealt with enough Victorias in her lifetime to know what was coming. The entitlement, the assumption, the inevitable confrontation. Victoria stopped directly in front of Claudia, invading her personal space with deliberate intent. Her perfume was overwhelming, something French and overpriced. She cleared her throat loudly, clearly expecting Claudia to look up, to defer, to step aside. Claudia remained focused on the bag, turning it slightly to examine the hardware. She could practically feel Victoria's indignation growing, could sense the familiar storm brewing. The boutique had gone silent except for the soft background music, something classical and tasteful that seemed at odds with the tension building in the air. Victoria shifted her weight, her designer heels scraping against the marble floor. Her perfectly manicured hand reached toward the bag in Claudia's grasp, her red nails glinting under the boutique's carefully arranged lighting. The sales associates watched with wide eyes, frozen in place, as Victoria Harrington prepared to assert what she clearly believed was her natural right to whatever she desired. Victoria's manicured fingers closed around the bag's handle, and with a swift, practiced motion, she yanked it from Claudia's grasp. The sudden movement sent a small echo through the quiet boutique, like a thunderclap before a storm. "Sweetheart!" Victoria's voice dripped with false sweetness, her lips curling into a condescending smile. "This isn't for you. Don't embarrass yourself." A collective gasp rippled through the store. The sales associates exchanged nervous glances, their perfectly practiced customer service smiles faltering. Two older women browsing scarves stopped mid-conversation, their mouths hanging open in shock. A young couple near the sunglasses display quickly pulled out their phones, camera apps at the ready. Claudia's hands, now empty, remained suspended in the air for a moment before she lowered them slowly to her sides. Her face remained perfectly composed, though a muscle in her jaw twitched ever so slightly. She'd spent years in corporate boardrooms learning to control her reactions, to never give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. This moment would be no different. "I believe I was examining that bag," Claudia said, her voice steady and clear. "Would you kindly return it?" Victoria clutched the bag closer to her chest, as though protecting it from contamination. Her diamond bracelet caught the light as she adjusted her grip, sending little prisms dancing across the marble floor. "Oh, honey, let's be realistic here." She gave a theatrical laugh, pitching her voice louder to ensure everyone could hear. "This bag costs more than you make in a month. I'm just saving you from disappointment." More phones appeared around the store, their cameras pointed directly at the unfolding scene. The young sales associate who had been following Claudia earlier backed away slowly, trying to make herself invisible behind a display of silk scarves. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. "The price is not your concern," Claudia replied, maintaining her composure. "I was in the middle of examining that piece, and I would appreciate—" "Listen," Victoria interrupted, her voice sharp despite her plastered-on smile. "People like you really shouldn't waste time in stores like this. It's embarrassing." She emphasized the last word, looking around the store as if seeking approval from her audience. "I mean, what were you planning to do? Put it on layaway?" A few nervous titters echoed from the sales staff, quickly silenced by the obvious discomfort of the other customers. The young couple with their phones had been joined by several others, all recording the interaction with varying expressions of disgust on their faces. "Ma'am," Claudia began again, her tone remaining professional despite the blatant insult. "I'll ask you one more time to return the bag." Victoria's laugh was loud and theatrical. "Or what? Will you call your lawyer?" She swung the bag carelessly from its handles, treating the expensive piece like a cheap prop in her performance. "I don't think you understand how things work here. This is a luxury boutique. We have standards to maintain." The "we" hung in the air like a challenge. Victoria's eyes swept over Claudia's outfit, the tailored suit, the modest jewelry, the tasteful makeup, searching for any flaw she could use to justify her behavior. Finding none only seemed to irritate her more. "These bags are exclusive pieces," Victoria continued, her voice growing louder with each word. "They're meant for a certain caliber of customer. People who belong here." She emphasized the word belong while looking Claudia up and down again. "People who can actually afford them without having to empty their savings account." The boutique had gone completely silent, except for the soft classical music still playing overhead and the occasional click of a phone camera. Even the sales associates had stopped pretending to work, standing frozen like statues among the displays. The tension had drawn everyone into its orbit, creating an impromptu theater in the middle of the luxury store. Claudia stood perfectly still, her spine straight, her shoulders back. She'd faced down hostile takeover attempts and weathered financial crises without breaking a sweat. This woman, with her borrowed confidence and obvious insecurity, was nothing new. Still, something about this moment felt different. Perhaps it was the phone's recording, or maybe it was simply that she'd had enough of such behavior going unchallenged. Victoria mistook Claudia's silence for submission, her smirk growing wider. She adjusted her grip on the bag, holding it like a trophy. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I actually have some real shopping to do." She turned slightly, addressing the nearest sales associate. "Someone should really consider implementing a screening process at the door. We can't have just anyone walking in off the street." The associate's face flushed red, but she remained silent, clearly torn between her disgust at Victoria's behavior and her fear of losing a high-profile customer. More phones appeared, their cameras capturing every moment of the confrontation. Claudia took a slow, deliberate breath. She could feel the eyes of every person in the store on her, waiting to see how she would respond. The weight of the moment settled around her shoulders like a familiar cloak. Throughout her career, she'd faced countless moments like this. Moments where she had to choose between keeping the peace and standing her ground. Victoria stood there, clutching the bag with both hands now, her smile fixed and smug. She clearly expected Claudia to slink away, defeated and humiliated. Instead, Claudia squared her shoulders and lifted her chin slightly. Her expression remained calm, but her eyes held a quiet determination that made several observers lean forward in anticipation. The classical music continued its gentle melody overhead, an oddly peaceful backdrop to the tense tableau. Victoria's knuckles whitened around the bag's handles as Claudia prepared to speak, the moment stretching out like a drawn bow. Claudia's voice cut through the tension like a blade of pure crystal. Clear, sharp, and impossible to ignore. Actually, I don't think you realize who I am. The words weren't loud, but they carried effortlessly across the now silent store. I'm Claudia Johnson, the majority shareholder of this company. The effect was immediate and electric. A wave of gasps rippled through the boutique, followed by urgent whispers and the rustle of movement as people shifted to get a better view. The phones recording the scene suddenly multiplied, their owners now even more invested in capturing every second of this unexpected turn of events. Victoria's face underwent a remarkable transformation. The smug superiority drained away like water down a drain, replaced by a sickly pallor that made her expensive makeup look garish. Her perfectly manicured hands, still gripping the contested bag, began to tremble slightly. That's... Victoria's voice cracked. She cleared her throat and tried again. That's impossible. I assure you it's quite possible, Claudia replied, her tone measured and precise. In fact, I own 38% of the company's shares. The bag you're holding? She gestured elegantly toward the piece in Victoria's white-knuckled grip. I had significant input in its design. A young woman near the shoe display let out a quiet, "Yes," quickly covered by her hand, but her eyes sparkled with vindication. An older gentleman in an expensive suit nodded approvingly, while his wife whispered something that made him smile grimly. Victoria's eyes darted around the store, searching for support that wasn't there. The sales associates who had been so attentive to her earlier now studied their shoes or suddenly found the ceiling fascinating. The customers who had witnessed her behavior regarded her with unveiled contempt. I don't believe you, Victoria managed, but her voice had lost its earlier authority. The bag in her hands now seemed to burn her fingers, but she couldn't seem to make herself let go. You can't be... The majority shareholder? Claudia finished for her, raising one perfectly shaped eyebrow. Why not? Because I don't fit your image of what success looks like? She smoothed an invisible wrinkle from her sleeve, the gesture somehow emphasizing rather than diminishing her authority. I've spent 30 years building this brand, Ms. Harrington, Victoria supplied automatically, then immediately looked like she wished she hadn't. Ms. Harrington. Claudia pronounced the name precisely, like a teacher taking attendance. I've dedicated my life to ensuring this brand represents true luxury, not just in its products, but in its values. Excellence, sophistication, respect. She emphasized each word carefully. The very qualities you've failed to demonstrate today. More phones appeared, their owners barely breathing as they recorded. A teenage girl in the corner was live-streaming, her face alight with excitement, as comments presumably flooded her feed. The young couple who had captured the entire incident exchanged delighted looks, clearly aware they were witnessing something extraordinary. Victoria's face flushed red, then pale again. The bag hung limply from her fingers now, all her previous possessive energy evaporated. I didn't... No, Claudia supplied. Clearly. But ignorance doesn't excuse behavior, does it? She extended her hand toward the bag. Now, shall we try this interaction again, with the courtesy our brand represents? A few customers broke into spontaneous applause, quickly stifled but heartfelt. The sales associate who had been following Claudia earlier looked mortified, her face a study in professional regret. Near the register, two other associates whispered urgently to each other, their eyes wide with recognition and dawning horror. Victoria stood frozen, her social confidence shattered. The bag swayed slightly in her grip as her hands trembled. The diamond bracelet that had caught the light so proudly earlier now seemed to mock her, its sparkle diminished by the brighter light of true authority. I apologize, Victoria managed, the words coming out stiff and uncertain. I didn't mean to. Yes, you did. Claudia corrected her gently, but firmly. Let's be honest with each other, Miss Harrington. You meant every word, every gesture, every implication. She paused, letting the truth of her words sink in. The question is, what do you mean to do about it now? The store had become so quiet that the soft classical music seemed almost intrusive. Every eye was fixed on the two women, one still radiating calm authority, the other visibly crumbling under the weight of her own actions. A murmur of appreciation ran through the watching crowd. An older black woman near the perfume counter wiped discreetly at her eyes, nodding in fierce approval. A middle-aged man in an expensive suit was already on his phone, speaking in hushed but excited tones about what he was witnessing. Victoria's carefully constructed facade continued to crack. Her designer dress, which had seemed so impressive earlier, now looked like costume jewelry next to a real diamond. She opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again, but no words came out. The tension in the store had shifted completely. Where before it had been charged with indignation at Victoria's behavior, now it crackled with satisfaction at seeing justice served so elegantly. Several customers had moved closer, forming an informal semicircle around the scene, their phones still recording every moment. Just as Victoria finally began to extend the bag toward Claudia, movement near the back of the store caught everyone's attention. The store manager was approaching quickly, his face set in stern lines. His expensive shoes clicked against the marble floor as he walked, the sound somehow ominous in the charged atmosphere. He moved with the particular urgency of someone who had just been informed of a situation they should have known about much earlier. As he drew closer, his expression seemed to favor Victoria rather than Claudia, despite everything that had transpired. His lips were pressed into a thin line, and his brow was furrowed with what appeared to be disapproval, directed not at Victoria's behavior, but at Claudia's presence. The store manager inserted himself between Claudia and Victoria, his tall frame creating an artificial barrier. What seems to be the problem here? His voice carried the practiced smoothness of someone used to handling wealthy clientele, but his eyes flickered dismissively over Claudia before settling warmly on Victoria. "This woman is causing a disturbance," Victoria said quickly, her confidence resurging with the manager's arrival. She clutched the bag closer to her chest like a shield. Claudia's eyebrows rose slightly. "I believe you have that backwards, Mr." She glanced at his name tag. "Mr. Peters. I was simply shopping when Ms. Harrington here decided to snatch merchandise from my hands." The manager's face hardened. "Ma'am, we've had several complaints about you making our customers uncomfortable." The lie was so blatant that several onlookers gasped. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." A deep ache settled in Claudia's chest, not of surprise, but of bone-deep weariness at the familiar script playing out. She had faced this scene countless times before her success, and apparently all her achievements couldn't shield her from facing it again. "Mr. Peters," Claudia said calmly, though her heart pounded, "I suggest you check with corporate before making any decisions you might regret." Victoria let out a theatrical laugh. "Oh, please, drop the act. We all know you're just trying to save face." She turned to the manager. "She's been claiming to own the company. Can you believe it?" The manager's lips twisted into a condescending smile. "Ma'am, impersonating company executives is a serious offense. I'm calling security." He reached for the radio at his belt. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, more insistent. "This is wrong," someone called out. "She didn't do anything." Several phones were still recording, their owners looking increasingly outraged. Two security guards approached from different directions, moving with careful precision. They were both young men who looked uncomfortable with the situation, especially given the number of witnesses recording every moment. "Mr. Peters," Claudia said, her voice carrying clearly despite its measured tone. "I am Claudia Johnson, majority shareholder of this brand. You can verify this with a simple phone call. The manager pressed the radio button. We need immediate assistance at the handbag section. He turned back to Claudia. Ma'am, please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. Victoria's smirk returned full force, her perfectly lined lips curling up at the corners. She adjusted her designer blazer with her free hand, radiating smug satisfaction. Some people just don't know their place, she stage-whispered to the manager. The security guards stopped a few feet away, clearly sensing the tension in the air. One of them, younger than the other, kept glancing between his radio and the crowd of witnesses. Claudia felt a familiar heat rising in her chest, not of shame, but of righteous anger carefully contained by decades of experience. She had built this brand from the ground up, fought through countless boardroom battles, navigated hostile takeover attempts, and reshaped the company's entire structure. She would not be dismissed in her own store. I'm not leaving, Claudia stated firmly, her voice carrying the weight of authority that had cowed far more formidable opponents than a prejudiced store manager. And I suggest everyone here consider very carefully what they're about to do next. The older security guard took a tentative step forward. Ma'am, don't you dare touch her, came a sharp voice from the crowd. A middle-aged woman in a business suit pushed forward. I've seen her photo in Forbes. She's telling the truth. Victoria's smirk faltered slightly, but she rallied. Anyone can appear in a magazine. Bradley, she addressed the manager by his first name, emphasizing their familiarity. This woman is obviously disturbed. She needs to be removed. The crowd had grown larger, with customers from other sections of the store drawn to the commotion. Their phones formed a wall of lenses, all focused on the unfolding scene. The younger security guard touched his earpiece, listening to something, and his expression changed to one of uncertainty. Mr. Peters, Claudia said, her tone now steel-wrapped in silk. While you're calling security, why don't you also call Robert Chen, our CEO? I'm sure he'd be very interested in how you're handling this situation. She pulled out her phone, its screen displaying several missed calls from corporate. Someone in the crowd must have already alerted them. The manager's confidence wavered for the first time, but he pressed on. Security, please escort this woman out. He gestured toward Claudia. Victoria clutched the bag tighter, practically glowing with vindictive pleasure. Finally, she breathed, loud enough for everyone to hear. But before the guards could move, a young woman near the front of the crowd stepped forward. Oh my God, wait, she exclaimed, her eyes wide with recognition. That's Ms. Johnson. I interned at corporate last summer. She literally runs this brand. The young woman turned to address the crowd directly. She's the one who created the diversity initiative in our design department. She's the reason I got my start in fashion. The security guards froze in place. The manager's face went from red to pale in record time. Victoria's smirk crumbled like a sandcastle hit by a wave. Claudia stood perfectly still, her posture regal, her expression composed. She had fought too hard and come too far to be moved by anyone's misguided attempt at authority. The whispers in the crowd grew louder, more supportive, as recognition spread through the onlookers. Claudia's heels clicked against the marble floor of her penthouse as she entered, the sound echoing through the quiet space. The sun was setting over Manhattan, casting long shadows through the floor-to-ceiling windows. She dropped her designer bag on the kitchen counter with unusual carelessness, her hands trembling slightly as she poured herself a glass of water. Rachel, who had been waiting for her, rose from the living room couch. I saw the videos online, she said softly. Are you okay? Claudia took a long sip before answering. 25 years building this company, she said, her voice tight with controlled emotion. 25 years of proving myself over and over again. And still, she set the glass down harder than intended, water splashing onto the pristine counter. "What happened after the videos cut off?" Rachel asked, moving closer to offer silent support. "Corporate finally called the store. Suddenly, everyone was falling over themselves to apologize." Claudia's laugh held no humor. "The manager turned whiter than his shirt when he realized who I was. Victoria Harrington practically ran out of there, leaving the bag behind like it was on fire." Rachel pulled out her tablet, her fingers flying over the screen. "The incident is already trending. People are outraged on your behalf. Respect Claudia Johnson is gaining traction." Claudia moved to her favorite armchair, sinking into it with uncharacteristic heaviness. "It's not just about me, Rachel. Every time something like this happens, I think about all the women who don't have my position or power, who can't make the phone calls I can make, who have to swallow their dignity and walk away." "I know," Rachel said quietly, still scrolling through her tablet, her brow furrowed. "Wait a minute. Victoria Harrington. I knew that name sounded familiar." She tapped rapidly on the screen. "She's Charles Harrington's wife." Claudia's head snapped up. "Charles Harrington? The board member?" "The same." Rachel's voice grew harder. "And look at this. I'm pulling up his voting record on company initiatives. Every single diversity proposal you've put forward in the last 3 years, he's either voted against it or abstained while lobbying other members to oppose." Moving to stand beside Rachel, Claudia scanned the data. "He's always been diplomatic in meetings, talking about market readiness and traditional consumer bases. I knew he opposed my vision, but this," she gestured at the screen, "this shows a pattern." Rachel nodded grimly. "It gets worse. His political donations have consistently gone to candidates who oppose corporate diversity mandates. And look at these country club memberships, all exclusively white institutions that have fought to maintain their traditional character." "So his wife's behavior wasn't just random prejudice," Claudia said, pieces clicking into place. "This is personal, political. They've been trying to undermine you since day one," Rachel confirmed, pulling up more documents. "Charles Harrington comes from old money. His family has held shares in the company for 3 generations. When you became majority shareholder, I threatened their control," Claudia finished. "Their entire worldview." Rachel set down her tablet. "What are you going to do?" Claudia stood, walking to the window. The city lights were coming alive below, twinkling like stars against the deepening dusk. "You know what my mother used to say? When they show you who they are, believe them the first time." She touched the cool glass. "Today, they showed their hand. The polite masks came off. The press will want a statement," Rachel said, already making notes. "We should focus on the larger implications, the systemic issues." "No," Claudia interrupted, turning from the window. "First, I want everything you can find on Charles Harrington. Every vote, every donation, every business dealing. Today's incident wasn't the beginning of this fight, but it might be the catalyst for ending it." Rachel was already typing. "I'll start with his board activities, then work backwards through his business partnerships. If he's been working this hard to maintain the old guard, there might be more than just prejudice to uncover. Look especially at the financials," Claudia added, moving to her home office. "Men like Charles Harrington often think their position makes them untouchable. That kind of arrogance leaves traces." The next hour passed in focused silence as they worked. Rachel's occasional updates painted an increasingly clear picture of systematic opposition to change, carefully hidden behind corporate politesse and procedural delays. "His wife's public humiliation of you wasn't an accident," Rachel said finally, looking up from her research. "It was the mask slipping, the real attitude they've been hiding in boardrooms and behind proxy votes." Claudia nodded slowly. "They thought they could intimidate me, shame me, make me doubt myself." She stood again, walking back to the window. The city was fully dark now, a glittering expanse of lights and shadows. Just like that store manager, they assumed they knew exactly who I was and what power I held. They underestimated you, Rachel said firmly. Again. They always do. Claudia's reflection in the window was steel and grace, decades of fought for authority evident in her posture. They see what they expect to see, someone they can dismiss, intimidate, or control. Her voice lowered. A whisper meant more for herself than Rachel. They've picked the wrong woman to humiliate. Behind her, Rachel's tablet pinged with a new alert. Claudia, she said, her voice sharp with discovery. You need to see this. I think I found something in Charles Harrington's campaign contributions. The numbers don't add up. Claudia's alarm chimed at 6 a.m., same as every morning, but her hand hesitated over the screen. She'd barely slept, her mind racing with strategies and remembered humiliations. Her phone was already vibrating with incoming calls and messages. 47 missed calls. Over 200 text messages. Her email inbox was bursting. Good Lord, she muttered, scrolling through the notifications. The first video clip auto-played, shaky phone footage of Victoria Harrington yanking the handbag from her hands. The caption read, "Watch, racist Karen attacks black business owner in her own store." Another clip showed the confrontation from a different angle. This one captured Victoria's sneering face clearly as she said those words. This isn't for you. Some things you people can't afford. Claudia's bedroom TV switched on automatically to her preferred morning news channel. The anchor's voice filled the room. Our top story this morning. Shocking footage from a luxury Manhattan boutique shows majority shareholder Claudia Johnson being racially profiled in her own store. Her phone buzzed again. Rachel. I assume you're seeing all this? Claudia asked by way of greeting. It's everywhere, Rachel confirmed. Every major network, all over social media. The store's Yelp page is being flooded with one-star reviews. People are calling for boycotts of the Harringtons' other business interests. Claudia moved to her walk-in closet, selecting a sharp crimson blazer and black pencil skirt. Power colors. Battle armor. What's the response like? Mostly supportive, Rachel said. Black Twitter is on fire. Several celebrities have posted in your defense, but? There's pushback too. Some commentators are saying you're making too much of it. That it wasn't about race, just a misunderstanding. The usual deflection tactics. Claudia's jaw tightened as she laid out her clothes. Of course, heaven forbid we acknowledge the obvious. Charles Harrington's PR team released a statement an hour ago, Rachel continued. They're calling it an unfortunate miscommunication and saying Victoria meant no offense. No offense? Claudia's laugh was sharp. She practically spat in my face. And that manager... She paused, an idea forming. Rachel, I want you to pull the employment demographics for all our flagship stores. Customer complaint records, too, especially any involving discrimination. You think there's a pattern? I know there is. We've had inclusion initiatives on paper for years, but implementation has been selective. Now we know why. Charles Harrington and his allies on the board have been quietly maintaining the status quo. Claudia moved to her bathroom, phone on speaker as she began her makeup routine. Her hands were steady now, each movement precise. What's the media asking for? Everyone wants interviews. Good Morning America, The View, CNN. No interviews yet, Claudia decided. First, we gather ammunition. I want hard data before we move. Numbers don't lie. Her phone chimed with another message. Rachel's voice turned grim. Charles Harrington just called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. Says it's to address recent events and their impact on brand reputation. How convenient. Claudia applied her signature red lipstick, a shade that matched her blazer. He wants to control the narrative. Preempt any action from me. What's our play? Claudia studied her reflection. She saw what she always saw. A woman who had fought for every inch of ground she'd gained, who had learned to turn other people's underestimation into her advantage. Call the board secretary, she instructed. As majority shareholder, I'm exercising my right to call an emergency meeting. Today, 2 p.m. Today? Rachel sounded surprised. That's in 6 hours. Exactly. Don't give them time to coordinate their response. And Rachel, make sure there's press outside. I want cameras when the board members arrive. Already on it. What about the store manager from yesterday? Suspend him, effective immediately. Pending investigation. Claudia moved through her apartment, gathering her things. And send me everything you found on Charles Harrington's campaign contributions. I want those numbers fresh in my mind. She could hear Rachel typing. The social media response is still growing. Claudia Johnson Strong is trending now. People are sharing their own stories of being profiled in luxury stores. This was never just about me, Claudia said, looking out her window at the morning sun hitting the Manhattan skyline. That's what Charles and Victoria don't understand. They made it personal, but it was already political. They just brought it into the light. Her phone buzzed with another call, this time from one of her oldest allies on the board, Diana Chen. Rachel, I need to take this. Get me those store demographics, and make sure the boardroom security cameras are working. I want everything on record today. Will do. And Claudia? Rachel paused. Give them hell. Ending the call, Claudia checked her reflection one final time. The woman in the mirror looked exactly like what she was. Someone who had spent decades preparing for this fight. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. When they show you who they are, believe them. The Harringtons had shown their true faces. Now she would show them exactly who she was. Her phone lit up with Diana's call again. Time to start moving pieces on the board. The emergency meeting would be her first counterstrike, but not her last. She had evidence, allies, and most importantly, the truth on her side. Claudia answered the phone, her voice steady and clear. Diana. Yes, I'm calling an emergency board meeting. 2 p.m. sharp. And believe me, they're going to want to be there for this one. The heavy mahogany doors of the boardroom loomed before Claudia. She adjusted her crimson blazer, straightened her spine, and pushed them open. 24 pairs of eyes turned to her. Mostly white, mostly male, all watching with varying degrees of hostility or careful neutrality. Charles Harrington sat at the far end of the long table, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his Italian suit immaculate. He didn't stand when she entered. Neither did most of the board members, except for Diana Chen and 2 others. Claudia, Charles said, his voice dripping with false warmth. So kind of you to join us. We were just discussing the unfortunate events of yesterday. Claudia took her seat at the head of the table, placing her leather portfolio precisely in front of her. Unfortunate is an interesting choice of words, Charles. I'd call it deliberate and systemic. A murmur rippled through the room. Charles's smile tightened. Now, let's not blow this out of proportion. My wife made an honest mistake. Your wife, Claudia cut in, her voice sharp but controlled, snatched a handbag from my hands and told me, some things you people can't afford. Would you like to explain what she meant by you people, Charles? Several board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Charles spread his hands in a placating gesture. You're emotional, Claudia. Understandably so. But we need to think about the brand. This social media circus is damaging our reputation. Our reputation? Claudia opened her portfolio and pulled out a stack of reports. Let's talk about reputation. In the past year alone, We've had 37 formal complaints about racial profiling in our stores. 72% of our sales staff are white, despite operating in diverse urban centers. And our executive leadership? She gestured around the table. I see the numbers haven't changed much since I raised this issue last quarter. Demographics shift naturally over time, Charles countered smoothly. We can't force diversity at the expense of qualification. Diana Chen, sitting halfway down the table, leaned forward. Are you suggesting qualified candidates of color don't exist, Charles? Of course not, he said quickly. But Claudia's aggressive approach is destabilizing. These viral videos, these accusations, they're hurting shareholder value. Our stock dropped 3 points this morning. It dropped because your wife showed exactly what's wrong with our corporate culture, Claudia replied. She pressed a button on the remote in front of her, and the wall screen lit up with security footage from the store. Let's review what actually happened. The board watched in silence as the scene unfolded. Victoria's sneer was crystal clear in high definition. The store manager's immediate bias was obvious. When it ended, Claudia let the silence hang heavy for a moment. This isn't just about one incident, she continued. It's about a pattern, a culture that Charles and others have carefully maintained, where people who look like me are treated as suspicious until proven wealthy enough to belong. Now see here, Charles began, his face reddening. You can't blame every negative interaction on racism. Perhaps if you hadn't escalated the situation. By what? Existing? Shopping in my own store? Claudia's voice remained level, but her eyes blazed. Tell me, Charles, how should I have responded to being publicly humiliated? Another board member, James Wilson, cleared his throat. Perhaps we could focus on solutions rather than accusations? What exactly are you proposing, Claudia? She pulled out another document. I have a comprehensive reform package. Mandatory anti-discrimination training for all staff. A new oversight committee for hiring practices. Clear consequences for discriminatory behavior, starting with the immediate termination of yesterday's store manager. Absolutely not, Charles snapped, his smooth facade cracking. You can't unilaterally make these decisions. Actually, I can. As majority shareholder, I have that authority. But I'm bringing it to the board out of courtesy. Claudia passed the documents around. You'll find everything properly formatted and legally vetted. Charles's face had turned an alarming shade of red. This is precisely what I mean by destabilizing. You're letting personal grievances drive business decisions. The board cannot support such emotional leadership. A few heads nodded, but Diana spoke up again. Interesting that you consider addressing discrimination emotional, Charles. Would you say the same if it had happened to your wife? That's different. He caught himself, but not quickly enough. Different how? Claudia pressed, watching him squirm. The room grew uncomfortably quiet. Charles tried to recover. Different circumstances entirely. And frankly, Claudia, your handling of this situation raises serious questions about your judgment. Perhaps it's time to discuss a change in leadership. Several board members looked alarmed at this naked threat. Claudia merely smiled, a cold, knowing expression that made Charles falter slightly. A vote of no confidence requires a supermajority, Charles. You don't have the numbers. She stood, gathering her materials. The reforms will be implemented immediately. I suggest you communicate that to your wife, along with a public apology. This is outrageous, Charles sputtered. You can't. I can, I have, and I will. Any board member who objects is welcome to tender their resignation. Claudia looked around the table. I've spent 30 years in this industry. I've built this brand's modern identity, and I will not allow it to become a symbol of the very discrimination I fought against to get here. The meeting was clearly over. Board members began filing out, some avoiding eye contact, others nodding respectfully to Claudia. As she reached the door, Charles's voice came from behind her, barely above a whisper. "This isn't over." Claudia didn't turn around. She didn't need to. She could picture his smirk perfectly. The same entitled expression his wife had worn in the store. The same assumption of superiority that had followed Claudia her entire career. She let the heavy doors swing shut behind her, leaving Charles alone with his anger and his rapidly diminishing power. Claudia's office glowed warmly against the darkening Manhattan skyline. She sat behind her desk, jacket now draped over a chair, surrounded by stacks of documents. Rachel perched on the edge of a leather armchair, tablet in hand, while Marcus Thompson, their lead counsel, paced by the window. "Look at this pattern," Rachel said, sliding a spreadsheet across the desk. "I've compiled customer complaints from the past 3 years. The numbers are disturbing." Claudia studied the data, her jaw tightening. 243 formal complaints about discriminatory treatment, but only 12 made it to corporate review. She looked up at Marcus. How were the others handled? Marcus stopped pacing. "That's where it gets interesting. Most were resolved at the store level. Store managers have surprising autonomy in handling complaints, a policy that, coincidentally, was implemented under Charles Harrington's guidance 5 years ago." "Of course it was," Claudia muttered. She stood, walking to the window. The city lights sparkled below, but her reflection showed exhaustion creeping into her features. He created a system where discrimination could thrive without consequences. Rachel tapped her tablet. "It's worse. I've been reaching out to former employees. Many report being pressured to profile certain customers, especially in our flagship locations. They were told to be selective about who received VIP treatment." "Selective meaning white and wealthy-looking," Claudia said. She turned back to face them. "How many were willing to go on record?" "7 so far," Rachel replied, "including a former manager who says she was forced out after raising concerns about racial profiling. She has documentation." Marcus pulled out his phone, scrolling through notes. "There's also a pattern in hiring and promotion. Despite qualified candidates of color applying for management positions, the flagship stores show an 82% white leadership rate. The explanations for passed-over candidates are suspiciously vague." Claudia returned to her desk, picking up a complaint form. "Listen to this one. Customer appeared suspicious, spending significant time examining merchandise without making immediate purchases. The customer was a black neurosurgeon who ended up spending $12,000 that day, after being followed by security." "Here's another," Rachel added. "A Middle Eastern couple was denied access to the VIP lounge despite having platinum member status. The manager claimed it was at capacity. Security footage shows it was nearly empty." Claudia pressed her fingers to her temples. "All this time, I've been fighting individual battles. The board resistance, the subtle undermining, Charles's constant challenges to my authority. But this is the bigger picture. They've built a whole machine to protect their version of luxury. Exclusive, discriminatory, and fundamentally racist." Marcus nodded grimly. "They've been clever about it. Nothing explicitly stated in policy, everything hidden behind euphemisms and discretion. But the pattern is clear when you look at the data." "Pull up the company values statement," Claudia said suddenly. Rachel complied, projecting it onto the wall screen. "Excellence without exclusion. Luxury for all who appreciate beauty. Pretty words that mean nothing if we're systematically making certain customers feel unwelcome." She stood again, this time with purpose. "Rachel, draft a press statement. We're going public with all of it." Marcus stepped forward. "Claudia, we need to be strategic about this. The board has hidden behind plausible deniability for too long," Claudia cut in. "Charles thinks he can threaten my position. Let's see how he handles full transparency. Rachel was already typing. What's our angle? Start with yesterday's incident, but frame it as symptomatic of larger issues, Claudia directed. We acknowledge the problem, take responsibility for past failures, and announce immediate reforms. She turned to Marcus. Can you fast-track those policy changes we discussed? He nodded. I'll have the legal framework ready by morning. But Claudia, you should know, going public like this, especially naming names, will make powerful enemies, she finished. I'm counting on it. Better to fight in the open than let them keep operating in the shadows. Rachel looked up from her tablet. First draft. Yesterday's widely publicized incident at our Madison Avenue location has brought to light serious concerns about discriminatory practices within our company. As majority shareholder and leader of this brand, I take full responsibility for addressing these systemic issues. Good, Claudia nodded. Add specific numbers. The complaints, the hiring statistics. Make it clear this isn't about one incident or one person. They worked for another hour, crafting each paragraph carefully. When Rachel read the final version aloud, the office had grown darker, the city lights now twinkling like stars through the windows. We are committed to fundamental change, not superficial gestures. Effective immediately, we are implementing comprehensive anti-discrimination training, establishing an independent oversight committee, and reviewing all hiring and promotion practices. We will also create a dedicated customer advocacy office to ensure every complaint is properly addressed. Claudia listened with her eyes closed, weighing each word. Add this. Luxury is not about exclusion. True elegance lies in treating every person with dignity and respect. We have failed to live up to these values in the past. That changes now. Marcus checked his watch. If we release this tomorrow morning, it'll dominate the news cycle. The board won't have time to interfere. Good. Claudia sat down at her desk, picking up a pen. Send me the final version for approval in an hour. And, Rachel, get me everything you can find on Charles Harrington's other business dealings. If he wants a war, I want to know every weapon he might use. Rachel gathered her things, pausing at the door. Are you sure about this? Once we hit send? I've never been more sure, Claudia replied, her voice steady. They thought they could humiliate me into silence. Instead, they've given me a platform to expose everything they've tried to hide. As Rachel and Marcus left, Claudia began writing her own personal statement to accompany the press release. The words flowed easily now, fueled by decades of accumulated frustration and determination. The time for careful navigation was over. Tomorrow, the real fight would begin. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel hummed with anticipation. Journalists packed the rows of chairs, laptops open, and cameras ready. The ornate crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the scene as Rachel surveyed the crowd from beside the podium. Standing room only, she whispered to Claudia, who stood just off stage. Every major network is here. Claudia smoothed her cream-colored blazer, touching the vintage pearl brooch at her lapel. Her mother's lucky charm. How many watching online? The live stream already has over 50,000 viewers waiting. Rachel checked her tablet. Social media's exploding. Claudia Johnson Speaks is trending. Claudia took a deep breath, reviewing her notes one last time. She'd rehearsed this speech throughout the night, but the words felt different now, charged with the energy of the waiting crowd. At exactly 10 a.m., Rachel stepped to the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Please welcome Claudia Johnson, majority shareholder of Laurent Luxury Brands. The room erupted in camera flashes as Claudia strode to the podium. She stood tall, commanding the space with quiet dignity. The reporters leaned forward, pens poised. 3 days ago, Claudia began, her voice clear and strong, I walked into our Madison Avenue store as a customer. Despite being the majority owner of this company, I was treated with suspicion, followed by security, and ultimately humiliated when another customer snatched a handbag from my hands, telling me people like me couldn't afford it. She paused, letting the words settle. That incident went viral. But today, I'm not here to talk about one moment of discrimination. I'm here because that moment exposed a deeper, systemic problem within our company, and within the luxury retail industry as a whole. Claudia gestured to the screen behind her, where statistics began to appear. In the past 3 years, our stores received 243 formal complaints about discriminatory treatment. Only 12 were ever escalated to corporate review. The rest were buried, dismissed, or explained away. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Cameras clicked rapidly. We found that store managers were given unprecedented autonomy in handling complaints, creating a system where discrimination could thrive without accountability. Former employees have come forward with stories of being pressured to profile customers based on race. Qualified candidates of color were repeatedly passed over for management positions with suspiciously vague explanations. She gripped the podium's edges. I stand before you today not just as a black woman who faced discrimination, but as a leader who failed to see how deeply these problems ran in my own company. That failure ends now. The room grew completely silent as Claudia outlined the reforms. Effective immediately, we are implementing mandatory anti-bias training for all employees, from the boardroom to the stockroom. We're establishing an independent oversight committee to review all discrimination complaints. Store managers will no longer have unilateral power to dismiss serious concerns. She clicked to the next slide. We're creating direct consumer reporting channels that bypass local management entirely. Every complaint will be logged, tracked, and addressed at the corporate level. We're reviewing all hiring and promotion practices of the past 5 years, with full transparency about our findings. Claudia's voice grew stronger. But perhaps most importantly, we're changing the culture that allows discrimination to hide behind words like exclusive and luxury. True luxury isn't about excluding people. It's about excellence in craft, design, and most crucially, customer service. All customers. Reporters' hands shot up, but Claudia wasn't finished. To those who say these changes will damage the brand, I say this: our brand is already damaged when we make any customer feel unwelcome. To those who claim we're overreacting to one incident, I say, look at the numbers, read the stories, listen to the voices that have been silenced for too long. She leaned forward slightly. And to those who think they can intimidate me into backing down, you clearly don't know me very well. Spontaneous applause broke out. Even veteran reporters set down their pens to join in. Claudia waited for it to quiet before continuing. This company was built on the idea that luxury should be available to anyone who appreciates quality and beauty. Today, we're rededicating ourselves to that principle, not just in words, but in actions. The applause this time was thunderous. Claudia could see tears in some eyes, people nodding emphatically. A woman in the third row mouthed, "Thank you." When the room finally settled, Claudia opened the floor for questions. Hands shot up everywhere. Ms. Johnson, how will you ensure these changes are actually implemented? We've already retained an independent auditing firm to monitor compliance. Their quarterly reports will be public. Next question. What about resistance from the board? Claudia's smile was steel-edged. As majority shareholder, I have final authority on these changes. The board's role is to advise, not obstruct. Have you heard from Victoria Harrington since the incident? This isn't about individuals. It's about systems that need changing. Next. For 45 minutes, Claudia fielded questions with unwavering composure. Her answers were clear, direct, and uncompromising. With each response, she could feel the energy in the room shift, from skepticism to support, from doubt to determination. Finally, Rachel signaled it was time to wrap up. Claudia raised her hand for a final statement. Change isn't easy. It isn't comfortable, but it's necessary. Today marks the beginning of a new chapter for our company. I invite you all to watch closely and hold us accountable. Thank you. More applause erupted as Claudia stepped away from the podium. Camera flashes lit up the room like lightning. She smiled confidently, feeling for the first time since the incident that real change was possible. At the back of the room, unnoticed by Claudia, Charles Harrington slipped out a side door, his face dark with anger. But Claudia was focused on the forest of raised hands, the supportive faces, the palpable sense that the tide was finally turning. Rachel touched her arm. They love you out there. Claudia nodded, still smiling for the cameras. This was her moment of triumph, and she intended to savor every second of it. The soft jazz and warm lighting of Le Bernardin created an intimate atmosphere as Claudia sat with Rachel and 3 of her closest friends. Crystal glasses clinked as they toasted her success. "To Claudia," said Monica, her friend of 30 years and fellow business owner. "Finally making those stuffy old men squirm in their seats. You should have seen their faces when the statistics went up," Rachel added, grinning. "I thought Charles Harrington was going to burst a blood vessel." Claudia sipped her champagne, allowing herself to relax for the first time in days. The press conference had gone better than she dared hope. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing with supportive messages all afternoon. The responses from former employees alone. Rachel shook her head. "We've got hundreds of testimonials pouring in. People are finally feeling safe enough to speak up. And the stock price actually went up," added David, Claudia's longtime financial advisor. "The market likes decisive leadership. You showed them exactly that today." The waiter arrived with their entrees, perfectly seared sea bass for Claudia, who had barely eaten all day. The familiar faces around her, the excellent food, the sense of victory. It all felt right. "I keep thinking about my mother," Claudia said softly. "How she'd save for months to buy one nice thing, only to be treated like she didn't belong in those stores." She touched the pearl brooch. She would have loved seeing this day. She'd be so proud. Monica squeezed her hand. "You're changing things, honey. Really changing them." The conversation flowed easily as they ate, discussing next steps and sharing old stories. Claudia felt the tension of the past few days starting to melt away, until she saw Rachel's expression change. Martin Chen, Claudia's lead counsel, was walking rapidly toward their table. His face was grim, and he carried a thick manila envelope. "Martin?" Claudia set down her fork. "What's wrong?" He glanced at the others. "I'm sorry to interrupt your dinner, but this couldn't wait. Could we speak privately?" Claudia led him to a quiet corner of the restaurant. "What happened?" "The board just filed this an hour ago." He handed her the envelope. "Charles Harrington moved faster than we anticipated." Claudia's hands trembled slightly as she opened it. The legal language jumped out at her. Motion to remove controlling interest. Citing breach of fiduciary duty. Actions detrimental to shareholder value? "They're trying to strip me of my shares?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "They're claiming your press conference was an unauthorized action that damaged the company's reputation. That your personal vendetta against the Harringtons represents a conflict of interest." Martin's jaw was tight. "They're saying your reforms will destroy the brand's exclusivity and tank its value." Claudia felt the room spin slightly. She steadied herself against the wall. "Can they do this?" "It's not a strong case legally, but Harrington has lined up significant board support. He's also filed for an emergency injunction to freeze your voting rights while the motion is pending. How long? The hearing is in 3 days. If the judge grants the injunction, you'll be effectively powerless until the full case is decided, which could take months. Claudia looked back at her friends, still chatting at the table, unaware that her world was crumbling. Everything I've built. We'll fight this, Martin said firmly. But you need to be prepared. Harrington's going to make it ugly. He'll try to paint you as unstable, unfit to lead. He's already lined up statements from store managers claiming you're creating a hostile work environment. The pearl brooch felt heavy against her chest. Her mother's voice echoed in her head. They'll try to break you down, baby. Don't let them see you bend. But right now, Claudia felt like she was breaking. She walked back to the table, forcing a smile. I'm so sorry, everyone. Something's come up that needs my immediate attention. Rachel saw her face and immediately stood. I'll come with you. The ride to the office was silent. Rachel read through the papers while Claudia stared out the window, watching the city lights blur past. We knew they'd fight back, Rachel said finally. We can handle this. Can we? Claudia's voice was hollow. Charles has been planning this for months. All those private board meetings, the whisper campaigns. He was just waiting for an excuse. The office was dark and empty when they arrived. Claudia walked to her desk, the motion papers heavy in her hands. Should I call the PR team? Rachel asked. Start preparing statements? No. Claudia sank into her chair. Just give me a minute, please. Rachel hesitated, then quietly left the room. Alone in her office, Claudia spread the papers across her desk. 20 years of work. 20 years of fighting her way up, of proving herself over and over, of building something she believed in. And now it could all be taken away because she dared to stand up for what was right. She picked up a framed photo from her desk, herself at the store opening 10 years ago, beaming with pride. The same store where she'd been humiliated 3 days ago. Her fingers traced the signatures on the motion. People she'd worked with for years, eaten dinner with, trusted. Now they were lining up behind Charles, ready to strip her of everything she'd built. The city sparkled beyond her window, but Claudia barely saw it. For the first time since this all began, she felt truly afraid. Not just of losing her company, but of failing everyone who was counting on her to make real change. The motion papers seemed to mock her from the desk. Her bold words from the press conference felt distant now, almost naive. How could she fight systemic racism when the system itself was rising up to crush her? Claudia sat in the darkness, her mother's brooch clutched in her hand, feeling more alone than she had in years. The city was still dark when Claudia's eyes snapped open. Her neck ached from falling asleep in her office chair. The motion papers lay scattered across her desk, a harsh reminder of reality in the pre-dawn gloom. 4:37 a.m. She'd barely slept 2 hours. Claudia stood and walked to the window, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. Below, the streets were quiet except for the occasional delivery truck. She watched a street sweeper make its way down Fifth Avenue, methodically cleaning the gutters. If only cleaning up corruption was that simple, she muttered. Her phone buzzed. A text from Rachel. Coming in early, bringing coffee and breakfast. Don't do anything drastic before I get there. Claudia managed a weak smile. Rachel knew her too well. She went to the executive bathroom and splashed cold water on her face. The woman in the mirror looked tired, but her eyes were clear. She straightened her silk blouse, which had wrinkled from her impromptu nap. Back at her desk, Claudia began sorting through the motion papers again. The language was carefully crafted to sound reasonable while painting her as unstable and dangerous. Words like erratic behavior and compromised judgment jumped out at her. 20 years of steady leadership, she said to the empty room, and suddenly I'm unstable because I won't tolerate racism. The door opened, and Rachel entered, carrying 2 coffee cups and a paper bag. "You look like you need this more than I do." She handed Claudia the larger cup. "What I need is a time machine," Claudia said, taking a long sip. "Go back and see all the signs I missed. Charles has been planning this for months." "Stop." Rachel pulled up a chair. "You're doing exactly what he wants, second-guessing yourself." "Am I wrong, though?" Claudia gestured at the papers. "I walked right into his trap. Got emotional at that press conference. Gave him the ammunition he needed. What you did was stand up for what's right." Rachel pulled out a croissant and placed it firmly in front of Claudia. "And you're not the only one fighting. Have you checked your emails?" Claudia shook her head. Rachel pulled out her tablet. 3 civil rights organizations have offered legal support. The National Retail Federation wants you to speak at their conference. And over 2,000 employees have signed a petition supporting your reforms. It won't matter if Charles succeeds in stripping my shares. Then we don't let him succeed." Rachel's voice was firm. "You taught me that, remember? My first week here, when that supplier tried to strong-arm us," Claudia remembered. "The supplier had threatened to pull their products unless they got better terms. She'd called their bluff and found 3 new suppliers instead." "That was different," Claudia said. "This is the entire board." "This is the same thing on a bigger scale," Rachel interrupted. "Bullies trying to force you to back down. And since when does Claudia Johnson back down from bullies?" Claudia stood and paced the office. "It's not that simple. Charles has connections everywhere. Politicians, media, other board members. He's been building this network for years while I focused on running the company. And that's exactly why you can't give up." Rachel's voice softened. "Do you know how many young women look up to you? How many people are watching to see if real change is possible?" Claudia touched her mother's brooch again. "That's what scares me. What if I fail them?" "The only way you fail is if you stop fighting." Rachel stood and faced her. "Remember what you said at the press conference? About how change doesn't come from being quiet and playing it safe? I meant every word. Then live those words." Rachel's eyes were fierce. "Charles wants a war. Let's give him one." Claudia felt something shift inside her, the familiar steel returning to her spine. Rachel was right. She hadn't fought her way to the top by cowering when things got tough. "Pull up the company's financial records," she said suddenly. "All of them, going back 5 years. Rachel blinked. "What are we looking for?" "Everything." Claudia's voice was steady now. "Charles has been on the board for 7 years. He chairs the finance committee. Nobody's ever questioned his decisions because of his political connections. You think he's been hiding something? Men like Charles always hide something." Claudia sat down at her computer. "They think they're untouchable, so they get sloppy. Pull up the audit reports first." Rachel's fingers flew across her tablet. "Starting with the most recent?" "No." Claudia's eyes narrowed. "Start from when he first joined the board. Look for patterns, unusual transfers, anything that doesn't add up. That's thousands of documents. Then we better get started." Claudia took another sip of coffee. "And get the forensic accounting team in here. Tell them it's urgent." As Rachel made the calls, Claudia began scanning through years of financial statements. The fear wasn't gone, but it had transformed into something else. Determination. If Charles wanted to play hardball, she'd show him exactly how hard she could hit back. Numbers scrolled across her screen as the sun began to rise over Manhattan. Somewhere in these records was the ammunition she needed. Charles had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated her. Again. "They're all just columns of numbers," Rachel said, frowning at her screen. "How do we know what we're looking for?" "Money leaves traces," Claudia replied, not looking up from her computer. "And Charles Harrington loves his money too much to resist playing with it." The morning light crept across her desk as they worked, casting long shadows over the motion papers that had seemed so threatening in the dark. Claudia barely noticed. She was focused now, hunting through years of data with the same determination that had carried her from a working-class neighborhood to the heights of corporate power. Let Charles think he had her on the ropes. Let him celebrate with his boardroom allies. She'd learned long ago that the best way to fight wasn't always head-on. Sometimes you had to dig deep, find the weak spots, and strike where they least expected it. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Claudia's office floor, where stacks of financial reports and printouts created a paper maze. Her eyes burned from hours of staring at spreadsheets, but she couldn't stop now. Something wasn't adding up in the numbers, literally. "Rachel, pull up the donor list for Senator Mitchell's campaign again," Claudia said, rubbing her temples. "Cross-reference it with our marketing budget from 2021. Rachel's fingers flew across her keyboard. Empty coffee cups littered her desk, evidence of their marathon investigation. "Got it. What am I looking for?" "Check the amounts. Anything over $50,000. The forensic accounting team had left an hour ago, but not before highlighting several suspicious patterns. Now it was just Claudia and Rachel, piecing together the puzzle that Charles had tried so hard to hide. "Here's something weird," Rachel said, frowning at her screen. 3 separate donations to Mitchell's PAC, each exactly $59,000, all from different shell companies. "Let me see those company names." Claudia walked over, her heels crunching on scattered papers. Rachel pointed to her monitor. Harrington Global Ventures, Summit Creative Solutions, and Pine Valley Enterprises? Pine Valley. Claudia's eyes narrowed. That's Charles's summer estate in Connecticut. He named a company after it? Wait, there's more. Rachel clicked through several documents. All 3 companies were incorporated on the same day, and they all list the same address, a P.O. box in Delaware. Claudia leaned closer, studying the numbers. "Now check our marketing expenditures for the same quarter. Look for anything labeled brand development or market research." More clicking, then Rachel gasped. 3 payments, all to different consulting firms, each one exactly $59,000. The same amount as the campaign donations. Claudia's voice was tight with controlled anger. "He's been laundering company money through fake consulting firms to fund political campaigns." "But why 59,000 specifically?" "Because 60,000 would trigger automatic reporting requirements." Claudia straightened up, her jaw set. He kept it just under the threshold. Clever, but not clever enough. She walked back to her desk, stepping carefully around piles of audit reports. The evidence was there, hidden in plain sight. Charles had been so confident in his position, so sure of his untouchability, that he hadn't bothered to cover his tracks properly. "There's more," Rachel called out. "Similar patterns with other campaigns, different amounts, different shell companies, but always matching our consulting payments exactly." "How much total?" Rachel's calculator clicked rapidly. "Over $3 million in the past 5 years. All company money, all funneled into political donations. Which explains how he's maintained such strong political connections." Claudia picked up a particular file, one they'd flagged earlier. "And look at this. Every time we had a major government contract up for renewal, there was a spike in these consulting payments. He was buying influence." Rachel's voice was disgusted. "Using our money to protect his position. Not just influence." Claudia spread several documents across her desk. "These contracts here, they all went to companies connected to the politicians he donated to. He was running a full-scale pay-to-play operation." The setting sun painted the Manhattan skyline orange outside her window, but Claudia barely noticed. She was focused on the paper trail that would bring down Charles Harrington. Years of careful documentation, financial statements, bank transfers, all pointing to systematic corruption. Should we take this to the board? Rachel asked. No. Claudia shook her head. Too many of them are in Charles's pocket. We need to go straight to the people who can actually do something about it. She picked up her phone, then paused. This call would set events in motion that couldn't be stopped. Once federal investigators got involved, there would be no turning back. Are you sure about this? Rachel asked softly, reading her hesitation. Claudia thought about the smirk on Charles's face in the boardroom, the way he'd dismissed her concerns about discrimination, his attempt to strip her of her shares and everything she'd built. He brought this on himself, she said, her voice firm. He thought he could push me out because I dared to stand up against racism in our stores. He never imagined I'd look closely at his finances. She dialed a number she'd been given years ago by a federal agent who'd investigated another company for similar violations. The line rang 3 times before a crisp voice answered. Special Agent Morris. This is Claudia Johnson, majority shareholder of Luxury Brands International. Her voice was steady, each word precise. I think you'll want to see this. What exactly am I looking at, Ms. Johnson? $3 million in embezzled corporate funds, laundered through shell companies, and funneled into political campaigns. I have complete documentation, including bank records and incorporation papers. There was a pause on the other end. That's a serious allegation. I'm a serious person, Agent Morris, and I have serious evidence. I can have a team at your office first thing tomorrow morning. Make it tonight, Claudia said firmly. I don't want to give anyone time to start shredding documents. I'll be there in an hour with 2 agents. The agent's voice sharpened with interest. Don't let anyone enter your office until we arrive. Understood. Claudia ended the call and looked at Rachel. Lock the door. No one comes in except federal agents with proper ID. Rachel nodded and moved to secure the office. What do we do now? We organize everything. Claudia gestured at the scattered papers. Every transaction, every shell company, every connection to political donations. Make it crystal clear even for non-financial experts. They worked quickly, creating clear timelines and flowcharts. The evidence was damning. Charles had been so arrogant, so certain of his immunity, that he'd barely tried to hide his tracks. Each document was another nail in his coffin. The sun had fully set, leaving the office illuminated only by desk lamps, when Rachel spoke again. Do you think he ever imagined this? That his attempt to push you out would lead us to uncover all of this? Claudia arranged the final stack of evidence, her movements precise. Men like Charles never imagine they'll face consequences. That's their weakness. A sharp knock at the door made them both look up. Through the glass, they could see 3 people holding up FBI badges. Morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the executive boardroom, illuminating the tense faces gathered around the polished mahogany table. Charles Harrington sat at the far end, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his Italian suit immaculate. His confidence radiated through his easy smile as board members filed in. Claudia took her seat quietly, noting how some members avoided her gaze while others shot her sympathetic glances. She placed a thick manila folder on the table in front of her, its contents carefully organized during her sleepless night. "Let's begin," Charles announced, his voice carrying that familiar patronizing tone. "We have a serious matter to address regarding the stability of our leadership." He nodded to his assistant, who distributed copies of the motion to strip Claudia of her controlling shares. The papers rustled as they were passed around, accompanied by uncomfortable shifts in chairs and cleared throats. "As you can see," Charles continued, "recent events have raised serious concerns about Ms. Johnson's judgment and ability to lead. Her public confrontation with my wife, while regrettable, is just one example of increasingly erratic behavior." Claudia watched him perform, marveling at his composure. Did he really believe he was untouchable? That his crimes would never come to light? The motion before us today, Charles said, is to invoke Article 7 of our corporate charter, which allows for emergency restructuring in cases where majority control threatens company stability. A few board members nodded along, already in his pocket. Others looked uncomfortable but remained silent. Charles picked up his pen, ready to call for a vote. "Before we proceed," Claudia said, her voice cutting through the tension, "I believe the board should review some relevant information." She opened her folder, removing the first stack of documents. "Ms. Johnson," Charles interrupted, "this meeting has a specific agenda." "Yes, it does," Claudia agreed, her tone steel beneath silk. "The agenda is corporate governance and leadership stability. These documents speak directly to that issue." She began distributing the papers, watching Charles's face carefully. The moment he saw the first page, a detailed flow chart of his shell companies, his confident smile flickered. "What is this?" demanded one board member, scanning the documents. "Evidence of systematic embezzlement and campaign finance fraud," Claudia answered calmly. $3 million of company funds funneled through fake consulting firms into political campaigns. The room erupted in murmurs. Charles's face reddened, but he forced a laugh. "These are absurd allegations. Each document is authenticated," Claudia continued, pulling out more evidence. "Bank records showing transfers from our marketing budget to shell companies. Incorporation papers for fake consulting firms. Matching donations to political campaigns, all carefully kept under reporting thresholds." She laid out photographs next. "Here's the Delaware P.O. box, where 3 of your shell companies are registered. Here's the empty office suite that supposedly housed your consulting firms. And here," she placed the final photo down, "is you, meeting with Senator Mitchell the day after a particularly large donation." Charles shot to his feet, his chair scraping backward. "This is a fabricated witch hunt. You're trying to deflect from your own incompetence." "The FBI disagrees," Claudia cut in, her voice level. "They spent all night reviewing these documents. Their forensic accountants found even more than we did." "You went to the FBI?" Charles's face contorted with rage. "You had no right?" "As majority shareholder, I had every right and responsibility to report federal crimes being committed with company funds." The boardroom doors opened. 3 FBI agents entered, their badges gleaming. The lead agent, Morris, stepped forward. "Charles Harrington?" Charles backed away from the table. "This is ridiculous. Do you know who I am? Who my connections are?" "You're under arrest for embezzlement, money laundering, and campaign finance violations," Morris stated flatly. "Please put your hands behind your back." "You can't do this," Charles shouted as an agent approached with handcuffs. "I built this company. Without my political connections, you're nothing." The metallic click of handcuffs echoed in the stunned silence. Board members watched, some with mouths agape, as Charles was read his rights. "This isn't over, Claudia," he snarled as agents led him toward the door. "You think you've won? My lawyers will bury you." Claudia remained seated, her posture perfect, watching with quiet satisfaction as Charles was escorted out. His threats echoed down the hallway, growing fainter until they disappeared entirely. The board sat in shocked silence. Several members were still staring at the evidence spread across the table, particularly the photographs showing their chairman's crimes. "I believe," Claudia said into the quiet, "we should table the motion regarding my shares. Unless anyone objects?" No one spoke. A few heads shook numbly. "Now then," she continued, gathering her documents, "I suggest we discuss the reforms I proposed last week, starting with anti-discrimination training for all retail locations." The board secretary began taking notes, his pen scratching against paper. The morning sun continued to stream through the windows, illuminating empty coffee cups and scattered papers. Evidence of how quickly fortunes could change. Charles's vacant chair stood as a reminder. No one was above accountability, no matter how powerful they believed themselves to be. His nameplate still gleamed at his empty place, soon to be removed like all traces of his corruption. The meeting continued, but the power dynamics had shifted permanently. Board members who had avoided Claudia's eyes earlier now sought her attention, eager to align themselves with the clear victor. The few who had supported Charles sat quietly, reconsidering their allegiances. Through it all, Claudia maintained her composure, neither gloating nor showing weakness. She had learned long ago that true power didn't need to shout or threaten. It simply needed to persist, to stand firm in the face of injustice, and to be ready when opportunity arose. The morning light caught the handcuff marks left on the polished table where Charles had been arrested, a fitting reminder that karma, when it finally arrived, could be both swift and complete. At 4 o'clock, the boardroom slowly refilled. The morning's dramatic events had left everyone shaken, and the afternoon sun cast long shadows across faces that looked years older than they had at breakfast. Coffee cups trembled in uncertain hands. Whispered conversations died as Claudia entered, her heels clicking purposefully across the marble floor. The chair Charles had occupied remained conspicuously empty. His nameplate had already been removed, leaving a slightly darker rectangle on the polished wood. Several board members stared at the vacant spot, as if expecting his ghost to materialize. "Thank you all for returning," Claudia said, taking her seat. Her voice was steady, professional, neither triumphant nor apologetic. "We have important matters to address." The board secretary, Thompson, cleared his throat. "First on the agenda is the formal withdrawal of this morning's motion regarding share control." He shuffled through his papers nervously. "Given the circumstances, I assume there are no objections." Heads shook quickly. A few members couldn't hide their relief at having avoided taking that vote. "Excellent," Claudia said. "Now, we need to address the leadership structure moving forward." She opened a leather portfolio, removing several documents. "With Charles Harrington's removal, we have an opportunity to reshape this company's future." Rebecca Chen, one of the younger board members who had always been quietly supportive of Claudia, spoke up. "I move to formally reaffirm Ms. Johnson's position as majority shareholder and grant her expanded executive powers previously held by Mr. Harrington." "Seconded," called another voice, then another. Those who had once aligned with Charles now seemed eager to distance themselves from his legacy. The vote was unanimous. Claudia accepted it with a slight nod, then turned to the real work at hand. "I have prepared a comprehensive proposal for company-wide reforms," she said, as her assistant Rachel distributed thick packets to each board member. "The first initiative," Claudia continued, "is the establishment of the Future Leaders Scholarship Program. We will provide full university scholarships to 50 students annually from underrepresented communities, with guaranteed internships in our company." She paused as board members flipped through the detailed proposals. "Additionally, we're creating an executive pipeline program to ensure diverse candidates have clear paths to leadership positions. This includes mentorship, specialized training, and guaranteed consideration for senior roles." "The costs," began Henderson, one of the more conservative members, but Claudia was ready. "Will be fully covered by the funds we'll recover from Charles's embezzlement schemes with significant surplus. The FBI has already frozen those assets." She allowed herself a small smile. "It seems fitting that money once used to maintain inequality will now help dismantle it." The room fell silent as that irony sank in. Several members nodded appreciatively. "Furthermore," Claudia pressed on, "we're implementing new accountability measures for all executives and board members." She outlined a system of transparent reporting, regular audits, and clear consequences for discriminatory behavior at any level. These changes aren't just moral imperatives, she explained, her voice gaining passion but maintaining its professional edge. They're good business. Studies show diverse companies outperform their competitors by 35%. We're not just doing what's right. We're securing our future. Rachel appeared at the doorway, giving Claudia a subtle nod. Right on schedule. Before we vote on these initiatives, Claudia said, I want you to see something. She pressed a button, and the boardroom's massive screen came to life. Live feeds appeared from their flagship stores worldwide. In New York, London, Paris, Tokyo, crowds had gathered. Customers, employees, and supporters held signs reading, Justice served, and Change starts here. Social media was exploding with support for the company's direction. This, Claudia gestured to the screens, is our real wealth. Not just our products or profit margins, but our potential to lead meaningful change in our industry. The board members watched, transfixed, as their brand transformed from a symbol of elitism to one of progress before their eyes. The marketing potential was obvious, but so was the genuine emotion in the crowd's faces. All those in favor? Claudia asked quietly. Every hand rose. Even Henderson's, though he tried to make it look reluctant. Motion carries, Thompson announced, his voice stronger now. The initiatives are approved. As the meeting concluded, Claudia gathered her papers unhurriedly. Through the boardroom's glass walls, she could see staff gathering in the hallway. Word of Charles's arrest and the morning's events had spread throughout the building. One last thing, she said, standing. The store where this all began? I've appointed a new manager. The previous one will be helping customers at our outlet location. She allowed herself another small smile. In the stockroom, a few chuckles broke the tension. Board members rose, several approaching to shake her hand or offer congratulations. The mood had shifted completely from the morning's hostility. Walking toward the boardroom doors, Claudia heard the growing murmur of voices outside. Rachel opened the door, and applause erupted from the gathered employees. Administrative assistants, marketing teams, design staff. People from every department had assembled. The applause grew louder as Claudia emerged. She saw tears in some eyes, fierce pride in others. These were the people who had watched her fight, who had endured their own battles with discrimination and prejudice. Their victory was hers, and hers was theirs. A young black intern stepped forward, holding out her hand. "Thank you, Ms. Johnson," she said, her voice quavering slightly, "for showing us it's possible." The crowd's cheers echoed through the corporate halls, bouncing off marble and glass, reaching even the security cameras that had captured Charles's humiliating exit just hours before. The sound carried the weight of change, not just promised, but delivered. A week had passed since the boardroom victory. The early autumn sun warmed the Manhattan sidewalks as Claudia Johnson approached the flagship store. The same golden letters gleamed above the entrance, but everything else felt different. Through the spotless windows, she noticed the new floor manager, Sarah Chen, a promising young executive she'd promoted, directing staff with quiet confidence. The security guard, different from last time, opened the door with a genuine smile. "Good morning, Ms. Johnson," he said warmly. "Welcome back." Claudia nodded, allowing herself to savor the moment as she crossed the threshold. The air inside carried the same luxurious scent of leather and perfume, but the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Gone was the suffocating tension of surveillance and suspicion. Staff members looked up from their tasks, offering respectful greetings. A few even beamed with pride. These weren't the forced smiles of people following new policies. These were the genuine expressions of employees who felt part of something meaningful. Sarah hurried over, tablet in hand. "Ms. Johnson, I wasn't expecting you today. Would you like to see our new display?" We've implemented all the changes you suggested." "In a moment," Claudia replied, her eyes drawn to a scene unfolding near the handbag section. The same spot where Victoria Harrington had snatched that bag from her hands. A young black woman, probably in her mid-20s, stood examining an expensive designer tote. She wore business casual attire, nice but not luxurious, and her body language spoke volumes. The slight tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers hesitated before touching the displays. Claudia recognized that cautious dance, the constant awareness of being watched, judged. But something different happened. A sales associate, one who had been there during the incident with Victoria, approached the young woman with a warm smile. "That's from our new fall collection," she said, reaching for the bag without hesitation. "Would you like to see the interior? It has some amazing organizational features." The young woman's surprise was visible, quickly replaced by relief and pleasure. "Yes, please," she said. "I've been saving up for something special to celebrate my promotion." "Congratulations!" The associate's enthusiasm seemed genuine. "This would be perfect for a professional environment. Let me show you the different color options we have." Claudia watched as the associate treated the young customer with the same attention and respect she would show anyone else. No hovering security guards, no suspicious glances, no assumptions about what she could or couldn't afford. The young woman looked up, catching Claudia's eye. Recognition flickered across her face. She'd clearly seen the viral videos, the news coverage. A knowing smile passed between them, heavy with shared understanding. Sarah still stood nearby, waiting patiently. "The display," she prompted gently. Claudia turned her attention to the manager. "Yes, show me." They walked through the store, Sarah pointing out the subtle but significant changes. New signs indicated their commitment to serving all customers with respect. The security cameras had been repositioned to cover the store more evenly, rather than focusing on certain areas. Most importantly, the staff moved through the space with a new awareness, greeting customers of all backgrounds with equal warmth. "Our customer satisfaction ratings have actually increased," Sarah reported, scrolling through data on her tablet. "And sales are up 12% since implementing the new policies." "Sometimes doing the right thing is also good business," Claudia remarked, pausing to examine a display of wallets. A group of tourists entered, speaking animated Japanese. Two staff members immediately approached, including one who spoke their language. Claudia noticed how the security guard remained at his post, not following anyone around. "We've had 3 graduates from the new training program start this week," Sarah continued, "and the mentorship initiative is already showing promising results." They completed their circuit of the store, returning to the entrance. The young black woman from earlier was now at the register, carefully placing her new purchase in its dust bag. The sales associate included a care kit and her business card, explaining their concierge services with genuine enthusiasm. As the customer turned to leave, she passed close to Claudia. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching her shopping bag like a trophy. Claudia watched her walk out, head held high, no security guards trailing her to the door. The simple dignity of shopping without fear, something that should have always been normal but had required a revolution to achieve. "Is there anything else you'd like to see, Ms. Johnson?" Sarah asked. Claudia shook her head. "No, I think everything is exactly as it should be." She gazed around the store one last time, remembering the humiliation she'd felt here just days ago. Now, the space felt transformed, not just by new policies and procedures, but by a fundamental shift in culture. She walked toward the exit, the same doors through which she'd once left, feeling shaken and angry. The security guard opened them again, and sunlight streamed in, warming her face. Behind her, she could hear Sarah starting a staff meeting, discussing customer service goals with enthusiasm. The world outside hadn't changed. The same busy Manhattan streets, the same mix of people hurrying past, the same challenges waiting to be faced. But inside this store, inside her company, something fundamental had shifted. It wasn't just about selling luxury goods anymore. It was about selling the idea that dignity and respect weren't luxuries at all, but basic rights. The autumn breeze carried the scent of possibility as Claudia stepped onto the sidewalk. In the window's reflection, she caught a glimpse of herself. Strong, unbowed, vindicated. She had taken a moment of humiliation and turned it into a catalyst for change. Not just for herself, but for everyone who would walk through those doors in the future. A passing woman did a double-take, recognizing her. "You're her," she said, smiling. "You're the one who stood up to them." Claudia smiled back, adjusting her designer bag, the same model Victoria had tried to snatch away. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I am. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day."